Coaching Soccer Weekly, episode 329. Interview with Jeff Loudermilk. Entertaining, educational, and inspiring soccer content to help make you a more effective coach, player, or soccer parent. Hello, and welcome back to Coaching Soccer Weekly, presented by World Class Coaching. My name is Sega Verbinovich, and this is the podcast devoted to bringing you cutting-edge methods, techniques, and tactics for coaching soccer. It doesn't matter if you're an experienced coach who has been working with teams for many years, or if you're new to coaching and working with a team for the very first time. There's something we can all do to take our coaching to the next level. Well, I hope you enjoyed last week's show. I had a really great time talking to Andrew, and it was just really nice even after the interview was over, just kind of catching up. And it's really nice and interesting how small the coaching world really is. So I really enjoyed that interview. Hopefully you'll like today's interview as well. This past weekend was really interesting. We had a lot of games. We had 3 games on Saturday, and then we had a couple of games yesterday on a Monday, which was I'll talk about as well. But that brings us to our first sponsor of today, and today's sponsor is VO. You know it, I know it, and we love it here at Coaching Soccer Weekly. I am super impressed with VO. When I put the camera up in the air, even on the windiest days, it stays up. It doesn't move. It's a clear picture, and it's just it's amazing. You know, I'm very worried when I have the camera up because it's so high up. I always think it's going to fall over, but it doesn't even move. So I think it's because it's very heavy on the bottom, and it just does a really great job of staying put throughout the game. And week after week, it's just allowing me to analyze the games better. So if you're looking for a really great video system, which is what it is, it's not just a camera, it's just a system, it's software as well, and just a really great way to take your club academy to the next level. You can use our code CSW100, that's Coaching Soccer Weekly 100, to get $100 off of your purchase of the amazing VO. And we thank VO at Coaching Soccer Weekly. So Saturday started out with our 2013 team, and we played against a really good team. It was kind of the first time that I felt pretty confident going into a game and just playing against a really good opponent. Looking at just the history of the academy and just kind of where we've always been, whenever we play a decent team, we struggle, and we don't really end up playing our game. But this week was really different. It was a very back and forth game. I think they were up 3-1 at one point. Then we were up, I think, like 5-4 at one point. Just very back and forth. We ended up losing the game in the last, I think, 10 minutes. We conceded 3 goals and I think lost like 8-6 or 9-6 or something like that. But what a great game. For the first third, we actually didn't even have our goalkeeper, and we were missing. Again, some players are away now for their just kind of their either camping or people go on vacation. So throughout the academy, we're really starting to see players leave and other players have to come in and take over. And one of those players was our 2014 player who's been with me since he was probably 6 years old, 5 years old. And he just fit like a glove into this team. Really, really great player, did really great things, and it's something that when 2013s are going away, I'm going to be able to bring a lot more 2014s into the team, have them play in the league, have them gain that experience, and that's really what I want to start doing with the younger kids, so that next year when our 2014s become U9, which is the first age group that we compete, we don't really compete at U8. I don't really see the point in it. I think our players, you know, one, they're super busy with other things, and 2, they get a lot more out of our training. There's no reason to put them in a game and force them into that situation yet, I think, just simply because there's going to be a lot of pressure, and it's going to force them to do things that I don't think they're ready for yet. They're going to be a lot of kicking up the ball. There's probably going to be a lot of scoring on us, which is, I think, going to hurt their confidence. So I really like to play our system, building out of the back at the youngest ages, simply because our goalkeepers can't kick it up. So, yes, I do not like playing in our half, and I've made that very clear, I think. But at the younger ages, it's very hard to just kind of kick it up and then keep possession in the other team's half at U8. At U9, we're able to do that. We were able to keep possession in their half a lot of the time. Just did a lot of really great things. We have to work on our defense, but that's, again, something throughout the academy that we have continued to see. So that's something that I'm working on within our training. Our 2010s had an interesting weekend. On Saturday, again, we were missing 3 or 4 players from our gold team, which is our A team. Not really our A team, but more of our 2010 team. So we brought from our black team, which is our mostly 2011 team, we brought some players up, played on Saturday on one of the hottest days I've ever seen. I think it was like 40 degrees at one point. We had 1 sub, and it was just a battle. The nets were pretty small, and it ended up being 1-0 them. Then we tied the game, and then they got a corner and crossed it in and scored, and we lost that game 2-1. But my goodness, we ended up, me and the other coach talked throughout the game, and the first thing that we did was put in water breaks in between the thirds, because we play thirds, not halves. And then after that, we reduced the playing time. By the end of the first, I was like, this is not going to happen. Like, we're not going to be able to get through all 3 thirds with 1 sub. So he agreed, and we brought it down from 23 to 20-minute halves. And it was an experience for the players, I think. And that's really important to have those types of experiences, play in really hot weather, play in rainy weather, storms, things like that. I remember in Kansas playing in tornado warnings and thunderstorms. They weren't games, but they were practices that I went out myself and did it. And just to get that experience, I think it is really powerful. So did really great. Then came back yesterday on Monday. We had 2 games against the same team, the same club. It was at first, it was our A team against their B team, our 2010s against their 2010 11s, and then against their 2010s, they played against our 2011. So both games went exactly the same. Both 2010 teams just cruised and pretty much beat up on the other team. I thought our 2011s did really well. The 2010s that we faced, they were really big, really strong, a lot bigger and stronger than our 2010s. So both teams, I think, ended up winning like 6 or 7-0, but very hard fought battle between all 4 teams. For us, it was pretty much the same team, except we rested most of the 2010s in the second game, and then a bunch of them left. So really good weekend. And then we had our 2012 team. The 2012 team is actually the one game that I didn't see this weekend. But with the magic of my old video camera, one of the parents recorded the game. Unfortunately, it wasn't in the quality that I am now spoiled with when it comes to VO. It was just kind of my old video camera that is not HD or anything like that. But I got to watch them play, and I got to tell you, it just makes me happy watching this team play. They are just a product of 4 years with me and just hard work. What I'm most proud of is that just about every single player except for one player are all products of our academy. They all started with us, played with us up until now. So I'm just super proud of that team, and they ended up winning, I don't know, like 6-2, something like that. But it was just the way that they played, kept possession, 1v1s on the wings. I mean, they're Maradonas, they're scissors, sides, everything that we do with the 1v1s. It's not just nice to watch. It's pretty, and it just makes me feel good. I don't know how else to say that. It's really everything that I wanted in my head to come out and just see it in the game is really nice. And whether I'm there, other coaches are there, and you can hear the parents, like, they are just always so excited and positive. So just a really great team, that 2012 team. And I don't know, we'll see what happens the rest of the year, and we'll see what happens in the winter. Maybe this team can go tier one next year. I'm not really sure, but we'll wait and see. This week I have an interview with a coach who reached out to me and told me that he has a really unique way of teaching his players something that he'll get into. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but I'll tell you kind of the concept and why this was something that I was excited about. For me, I'm a very visual learner, so everything that I do with my players, I need them to see it, whether they see it on the tactic board, whether they see it on the field, whatever that is. I need them to see it, but that's just the way that I learn. But I know from doing research into teaching players and how learning in the most effective way takes place, there are other ways to learn. And one of those ways that don't that I'm not really strong with, because I'm very strong with visual, is auditory. So this coach came up with a way to get that into his coaching environment, and I thought it was really cool. Now, he created a poem, and he'll get into it, which I'm really excited about. But don't just kind of take this and see the poem and then just kind of bring it into your environment and all that. I want you to really try and think of the idea behind what he is doing. The different ways of learning. There's visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and reading and writing. So those are really the four different types. And this is just another type of way to get your players to learn. Now, we did have a little bit of audio issues here and there, but overall, it should be pretty good. So here we go, my interview with Jeff. On the show today, I'm really excited to have Jeff Loudermilk. He is a coach from Brenton, Florida, and he coaches at a club called Braden River Soccer Club, and he's been there for about 6 years. He's got over 20 years experience. He has a USSF C license. So super excited to welcome Jeff onto the show. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So can you tell the listeners in like 200 words or less a little bit about you?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I coach at Braden River Soccer Club. I've been there for 6 years. Next year will be my seventh. I typically take girl players from the last year of 9v9 U12 to the first year of 11v11 U13. As you mentioned, I've coached for 20 plus years in a variety of places. And the reason I'm typically on the girl side is I had a daughter that came through. I helped develop her from about age 4 to age 22. She did play in college, was very successful. Matter of fact, she's dabbling in coaching right now. Yeah, that's briefly what my experience looks like.
That's awesome. So you mentioned that it got you started because, your daughter was in it. And I'm guessing at that time you weren't a full-time coach, or were you even a full-time coach before that? Or did you transition while you were coaching her into that full-time role that you have now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did play some ASA way back in the day. But yeah, I dabbled with training her over the years. And so I started out as a part-time coach. And then eventually, when I had more time on my hands, I became a full-time coach pretty much the last 7 years.
That's awesome. And have you always coached in Florida?
Oh, no. I was in the military for quite some time. Played in the military leagues, also coached. So I've played and coached in a lot of unusual locations, Japan, Qatar, Turkey, and a lot of different places in the States.
So what's kind of been, growing up in that military and then going into different countries and seeing different styles of coaching and the different cultures there are, what kind of impact did that have when you came back to the States and started coaching your daughter? Did you find that your coaching styles were very different than what was going on around you? And if so, how?
Yeah, and that's a great question. And that is very much true. So, being exposed to different cultures, what that really ingrained in me was that, you really have to understand the individual personalities out there and where they are in their development. And, obviously all kids, all youth players don't develop at the same rate. And I know today we'll talk a little bit about, uh, cognitive development on 11 to 13-year-olds, but you may have an 11-year-old that can understand concepts, but you may have a 13-year-old that cannot. So those different cultural experiences really ingrained in me that you have to understand those individual differences and development patterns.
And what's kind of going from country to country, if you could kind of, in, I don't know, a short couple of sentences, something that you got from your experience in Japan and then other countries as well.
Yeah, Japan is very interesting in that they're just a very, very polite people, very respectful. I'll just tell you one quick funny story. So the first time I pulled up into a gas station, the attendant literally sprinted to the car, and you haven't seen that in the States for many, many years. But they so much want to please you as well. So if you work with kids at that level, they are very focused, very in tune, very respectful of adults. So that's one thing I got from kids there. Turkey's interesting in that they really love the sport, and they love the sport, just to participate in the sport. But very, very, technical, very aggressive play at times. And then in Qatar, that was interesting. I didn't really work with kids there. I did work with a few of the locals, but the interesting thing about Qatar is most of the work there are not done by Qataris, they're done by third country nationals. So it was really kind of a melting pot of people there. So I was exposed to a lot of different cultures.
That's awesome. Cool. So I guess today we're going to be talking mostly about that 11 to 13 age group. And you mentioned that you really work with players that are going from 9v9 to the 11v11 game. So at that point, we're adding two extra players. So what does that look like for you when they first come in, as the first time going in from that 9v9 to that 11v11 environment?
Yeah, there's several patterns you typically see with that. The first thing that you see in that transition is they tend to bunch in a quarter of the field. So you have to work through that. The second thing, clearly, with the bigger field are the distances. We've got to cover, bigger distances on our attack with our forward diagonal balls. And then the last thing that I see is, because you're adding additional players, typically in the midfield, in the back line, now you've got two center backs that have to work together. Typically, you've got two or more midfielders that have to work together. So that's generally the challenges that I see in that transition.
Nice, awesome. And we want to get into the final third, which is going to be, I guess, the main topic today. And you had a unique way of training that you've talked about, that you emailed me and let me know a little bit about before. Can you explain to the listeners what that looks like for your players?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll kind of start with, the challenges that I saw first. And I've kind of mentioned this a little bit previously, but you have to understand the cognitive development of these players. And again, they're just starting to understand concepts. So you're more effective if you make it very practical for them. And then once they have those practical trends in their mind, they can see the concepts. But when you really think about coaching education, and I'm not trying to imply it's done the wrong way, I think it's done the right way. But in coaching education, we start with concepts. We start with, well, there's two fundamental ways to attack. One's the build up, one's direct. Then we talk about principles, penetration, support, mobility, width, creativity. And then, US Soccer, if you go to one of their license courses, will work you through the goals, the general principles, the team tactical principles. So, the coaches are taken from the conceptual down to the practical, but the kids understand the practical first, and that's how they form these concepts. So that was the first challenge I saw. And then the second thing is, and you see this a lot with a lot of youth teams, is they will attack and then they get to the top or near the 18, and it's, hey, what's the plan now? We don't really know what the plan is. And so I was looking for a way to, how can I package the attacking types in their mind so they could better execute those. So, that's kind of how this thing started. Uh, so, let me tell you kind of just a quick funny story I heard years ago. So I heard about a baseball pitcher, and he's on the mound and he's just throwing ball after ball after ball. He's really struggling out there. And so the coach walks out, and the pitcher thinks, great, he's going to come out. He's going to help me with something technical here to kind of get me out of this slump. And then as the pitcher was talking to his friends later, he said, you're never going to believe what the coach told me. The coach told me, throw strikes. And he's like, I know I need to throw strikes. Do you have more than that? And I think that kind of points out the example of some of the kids that we work with out there. And let me say this too, that I'm not trying to create joystick kids. Like I tell the kids out there, there's an unlimited amount of possibilities when you're on the field, and you have to play the game. I'm going to give you a few, general patterns here, and then you have to figure things out in the moment of play. But here's what I came up with, and it, may sound a little hokey, but I have all my 11, starting off 11-year-olds, U12, memorize this poem, and I call it 5 Ways to Attack. And once you hear this, you'll hear that it's laden with keywords and cues, and I'll kind of work through it verse by verse after we go through it. But I call this poem 5 Ways to Attack. When our target player does get stuck, our wings get up and we find luck. Love the inline, cross and cut back, all in the gaps where we take a whack. Our 9 stays high in their back line. We funnel the through ball every time. Near the 18, it's ticky-tack a ball, quick short passes to break their wall. Beyond midfield for an early cross, weak mid up, and she's the boss. So that's the simple poem.
Got it.
Yeah, so just kind of working through that verse by verse, the first verse, when our target player does get stuck, our wings get up and we find luck. And what we're trying to describe there is, if you have a target player, which is typically a 9, they're going to be with back to goal. Usually they have pressure on their back. So, and that's another tough thing to kind of work through kids through is, you don't want them turning into pressure. So they've got back to goal. They've got pressure on their back. If our wings or our 7s and 11s or our fullbacks get up the field, now that target player has an option. They can play the ball out wide to one of those players. And of course, if they get stuck to, they can drop the ball to, either a 6 or 8 or a 10 coming up the field to overlap. But that's one thing to think about for target player. And then the next verse, love the inline, cross and cut back, all in the gaps where we take a whack. And so clearly here we're talking about crosses and cutbacks. And I'll just spend a second talking about cutbacks. The interesting thing about cutbacks and dealing with this age group is, typically you've got the ball near the end line, but you're not out wide at the corner. You're somewhere between the corner and the goal. And I tell players at this age, you got to resist the temptation with every ounce of your body to do 2 things. The first thing you got to resist to do is take a bad angle shot. And you see that a lot. The other thing you have to resist is crossing the ball. You're too close to goal to cross the ball. And I don't think it's reasonable to expect this age to be able to, chip the ball with any accuracy. So what we teach here is the cutback. And I tell them in the moment, a lot is going on here. It's very dynamic. There's not a lot of time to think. If you can find, one of your teammates, near the PK spot or near the 6, that's fine. And clearly you want to cut the ball back so that you're making the keeper, have to make a decision. Do I stay on my line and protect the goal, or do I come off my line and try to collect the ball? And kind of even getting, one step further there is, at this age, it's important for them to understand that you want these defenders and goalkeeper to make as many decisions as they have to, because the more decisions they make, the more mistakes they're likely to make, and the more successful we'll be. But on the cutback, what I tell them, it's really busy there. So if you can't find a teammate what I look for is the two nearest defenders and just push it through that gap. Uh, so as far as the poem, cross and cut back, that's what we're talking about there. And of course, a couple of other keywords in that verse were gaps. So on the attack, if we see our teammate about ready to cut the ball back or cross the ball, we need to be finding the gaps. And I've got take a whack there. I just put that in there to rhyme, but basically take a shot or try to take a shot. And then the third verse here, our nine stays high in their back line.
Well,
We
let's hold on because there's
sure,
already a lot to unpack there. So the first thing
sure,
that we spoke about, right, was that first verse was with that 9, 7, and 11, and with that target player and having them
correct,
coming up in support. So is there, and let's just try and focus on the first two for now.
sure.
What do you do? What does a session look like that for you would focus on that? Because yes, they do the poem and everything, and obviously
Right,
there are different ways to learn, right? There is everyone kind of learns differently, so there's kind of that the auditory and all these different ways of learning. How do you
right.
show them and get that repetition for what you've had in that poem to come into the practice and then the game?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as far as a target player, when we're running sessions to emphasize that point, we play a lot of 5v5. And when we play 5v5, typically, we're on a small size field. We may use smaller goals, but the reason it's 5v5 because that gets you in a 1-3-1. And so clearly you've got a definitive 9 there, and you've also got a couple wings. And what I tell the players that I'm looking for there is a couple things. Number one, that those wide players are getting up and down the field to form that diamond with let's say the 6, 8, 9 in the center of the field. So that's one thing we're looking for, and you have to do that to be successful. Clearly, if those players don't get up in support, the target player is going to get stuck, like the poem says. The other thing that I look for in those sessions is the center players. In this case, I'll call them the 6, 8, and 9. They have to check strong side if the wing is in possession of the ball. And so we're consistently trying to form those diamonds and triangles to keep the attack moving forward. So that's what a session would look like with a target player, just one of the sessions.
And do you focus on the cutback as well in those 5v5s?
No, so in the cutback, a couple things I've done. One thing that's really successful as far as training that is, again, a small sided game, and you can put a player outside the end line. So you've got the goalkeeper, and then you've got them framed by either one, or you can put a player on each side outside the end line. And so the attacking team is coming forward, and they can play that player outside the end line. Now, what I tell that player so they don't kill the ball is you've got one touch. So they play that player outside the end line. That player outside the end line has one touch to try to get it back into an opponent so that they can finish.
Now, do you, within that, do you have them start in the wide space and then eventually go into the half space, or do you just work in the half space for those cutbacks? Because in the poem you mentioned that the cutbacks would be, I'm guessing, in the half space,
Correct.
and then in the wide space would be the crosses. So where do you have those players in those sessions? Do you have them in the half space and kind of shrink the fields in that small sided game, or is it in that wide space? And sometimes you kind of let them drift out wide so they can get their touches where, I mean, I don't know how you have your players, but if you have your wingers in the wide space most of the time, or if you have them in the half space, do you have them in the same spaces that you would in the game? And are those spaces, and what are those spaces is essentially my question.
Yeah, great question. So in the cutback, we typically operate in the half space, and that's what the training session is set up around. Now, and I know in kind of my poem, I've got cross and cutback in the same verse, but we train those differently. So when we are training the cross, we do train out wide. And a lot of times, and obviously part of the poem later on is the early cross. One way to, train the cross and early cross is to put a player outside the touchline that can't be defended. And so depending on where they get the ball, higher or lower up the field, they can send that early cross or that cross. And typically, depending on what I'm looking for, especially if I'm looking for like the early cross, I'll tell them 2-touch maximum because they're not being defended out there. And clearly, when the ball's off the field, if you will, it doesn't create that much of a game-like situation for the players on the field. So if I'm looking for the early cross, I'll have that player outside the touch line limited to 2 touches. But if we're crossing, I may give them extra touches so they can get down near the end line. But that's just so at this age you can try to get a quality cross because if you okay, yeah. So we're talking about the how do we train to the cross and early cross? We do train in the wide spaces there, and just one of the ways I train that is that I will shrink the field width a little bit. However, I do have a neutral player play outside the touch line. And, they are undefended out there. Now, if we're training the early cross, typically I will limit them to a 2-touch maximum because, obviously I want them to receive the ball, send that early cross behind the opponent's back line. If we're training the cross, I may give them some extra touches because I want them to get near the end line. But with the cross and the early crosses, we are training in the wide spaces, and that's just one way to train that to be effective.
Yeah, it's interesting. Last week's show would have had it because I just recorded it. But I've actually done something very similar, but I've actually focused on the defensive side of it because what has been happening was when teams would cross against us, we would just kind of leave our defenders and we would just ball watch. So a lot of the crosses were easy tap-ins for the other team. So I actually did pretty much what you, I think, described, which is I had 8 players on the field, 2 goalkeepers, 2 defense against 2 defense with 2 neutral players in the wide space. And we would just play. And again, kind of the same rules that you had, but I liked the 2-touch max. I think really would help, especially if you want to do the early crosses. So I really like that. The other thing that I found really interesting was the gap idea of where to place that ball for the wingers, right, with your cutbacks, because usually what I say is, find a player, but I don't think that's specific enough. So the idea of maybe the defender between the defender and the goalkeeper, that gap there that exists is where we should really be trying to get that ball into. So I really like that part of it. But yeah, let's move on to verse number 3.
All right, great. So number 3, our 9 stays high in their back line. We funnel the through ball every time. And some of this has to do with style of play, system of play,
Yeah.
formation of play. But the way that we play, we typically keep our 9 in the opponent's back line. And the reason that we do that is I want to stretch the other team vertically, to create that space so that we can build through the middle of the field. And we play a lot of 4-2-3-1. So, with only 3 attacking midfielders stretched across the field, it's important for us to create that space so that they can operate in the middle of the field, because the more compressed that our midfielders get on the attack, the more unsuccessful we typically are. So our 9 plays high in their back line. And, for a through ball to be effective, that pretty much has to happen, because if you play a false 9 or a 9 that's, let's say, 10, 15 yards, lower than their back line, it's going to be tough to be successful with that through ball. And another thing I point out to the players at this age, I always try to sprinkle in a little bit of analytics and, factual information. What I tell them is, if you look at like the English Premier League, look at analytics there, they say the most shots come off cutbacks, the most goals come off through balls. And that's why a lot of people call those the 2 most dangerous passes in soccer. So, okay, great. Yeah. So, in the English Premier League, as I was saying, if you look at analytics there, what they'll tell you is you get more shots off a cutback, but you get more goals off a through ball. So that's why they're called the two most deadliest passes in soccer. And so what I tell our players, albeit young players, hey, if, the English Premier League can be successful at that, certainly we need to try that too. So, again, we keep the 9 high in the opponent's back line, and one of the players in support are trying to funnel that ball, and that's another key word, through the opponent's back line. And then depending on the kind of wherewithal cognitively of the players, we'll talk about some next level things. For a through ball to be very successful, you either need vertical pass, diagonal run, or you need vertical run, diagonal pass. Because if you have the ball and the player moving on the same plane, either A, it's too easy to defend, or B, the 9 is going to have to find the ball. And typically I'll tell players, look, if our 9 has to go find the ball, that's going to be a long day. We want the ball to find our 9. So that's what that verse of the poem is all about.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. Especially the point I was watching one of our League One reserve teams, the local teams here, and they had two of the wingers in the wide space together. So if you're both in the wide space, it makes it really difficult to find each other because the defenders can just very easily cut that passing lane. So I completely agree with that idea of having players on different planes. And we know from, Pep's quadrants that he has, I think he's got like 32 quadrants that he makes on the field, that it's very important to have different shapes and different angles. And the more angles you have, the tougher it is for the defenders to essentially block those lanes. So completely agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously, as I mentioned, we do play a lot of 4-2-3-1. The reason we do that is, we're a medium-sized club, so we're going to play some clubs that we're superior to, and we're going to play some clubs that we're inferior to. And certainly, as you get toward the end of the season, you're going to play some very good teams. So we have to play a little more defensive in our formation, but then that creates the problem of how do you generate attack out of that. So one of our style formation of play is that weak side midfielder. We always try to keep high on the attack to add, basically an additional forward on that side of the field. But we have to do that to be effective. And then, another thing we'll do, and again, depending on kind of the wherewithal cognitively of the team, and my current team understands this, we may play an unbalanced formation where we may have, say, the 11 pushed up on the same line with the 9. Now, obviously that's going to create some space behind them that a 6 or a fullback has to cover. But again, we have to do some of those things to try to generate a more credible attack.
Yeah. And from what I know about Florida, it's one of the, oh man, I'm going to get in trouble, but it's one of the more competitive states there are, with a lot of really high quality teams. I don't know much about the states, but I do know that Florida is a name that comes up often. But yeah, all right. So let's move on to the next verse. So I think we're on verse 4.
We're on verse 4. Near the 18, it's tiki-taka ball, quick short passes to break their wall. And what I'm trying to tell the players here is that, if your attack stalls or, depending on where you gain possession of the ball, the other team may get very organized behind you, in and around the 18. And if they're very organized, it's going to be tough to break them down, especially if they're disciplined and they defend predictively. So at that point in time, you got to have quick, short passes to hopefully create a gap that will create a chance and create a shot. And one of the training exercises I do for that is I will either use the 18 or maybe an expanded 18, and I'll put the players, in there in possession, and I'll put quite a few players in a small space. Let's say, 5v5, and I'll set a pass limit. Let's say 5 passes. And then after they complete 5 passes, then they can take a shot on goal. And so what I'm trying to teach them to do is those quick short passes in and around the 18 to hopefully pull those defenders out of shape so we can create a chance or create a shot.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. We definitely and I also talk about the wall and how to move the wall because the wall, if you're a possession-based team, then you're facing different three different walls usually, right? Attack, midfield, and defense. And it's really important to be able to move those players because that's how you're really able to keep that possession. Cool. All right, so
Yeah.
let's move on to the next
All right.
yeah.
Number five. So number five, beyond midfield for an early cross, weak mid up, and she's the boss. And we've kind of alluded to this so far, but the early cross is very, very effective, particularly against an opponent that plays a high line. And as I mentioned earlier, our style and formation of play is that on the weak side, we'll push that weak side midfielder up. So we're just waiting for that early cross to come across. And typically, if you can generate that early cross and you've got that weak side wing player high, I mean, you're going to generate worst case a 1v1, enter near the 18, which, you'll take 1v1, enter near the 18 all day long. A lot of times it's a 1v0 because that weak side fullback on the opponent starts pinching in and ball watching. And I mentioned earlier kind of how we train that. One of the typical ways is, I'll shrink the field in width. I'll put a player outside the touch line. I'll give them 2-touch maximum. Now, I will take the field, the vertical distance of the field, and I will put a midfield line outside the touch line. And what I tell them is that neutral player out wide that's being undefended, that if you're in the attacking half, yeah, it's 2-touch early cross every time. If you're in the defending half, let's just play possession because clearly you don't want them sending an early cross, 60, 80 yards from goal. But that's typically how we play that. And so, thus the key words: beyond midfield, early cross, the weak mid is up, and she's the boss, basically meaning hopefully she'll get the ball, 1v1 worst case, 1v0, best case.
Yeah, and I think that early cross is one of the most powerful passes because there's so much space at that point between the defensive line and the goalkeeper that, especially if you have a very fast forward, it really gives them the space and time to do something with the ball. Whereas a lot of teams that we play against in the younger ages kick the ball up, and by the time it bounces a couple of times, there isn't really much space for them to score on us. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. All right. So how many more lines do we have? Where are we at?
That's it.
That's it.
That's the 5.
All right. Awesome.
So again, just trying to package in their brains, the different ways to attack: target player, cross, cutback, through ball, ticky tack, or early cross. So as they're going forward, hopefully they've got this, embedded in their brain, and they're thinking, okay, I'm looking at the patterns on the field. I'm using my field vision. Hey, I see this setting up. I know what the keywords are. Boom, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really great because for me, I'm a very visual learner. So this is something that I've never really thought of, and I think great coaches all should have a plan, whatever that plan is. So I think for the listeners, the key takeaway for me here is that, write down what it is that's in your head, get it down on paper, and find a way to maybe write a poem just like you did, or some other way that the players can, in a different way, learn that, because we know kids learn differently. So really great. And thanks for coming on the show, Jeff, today. And hopefully you had a good time.
Hey, well, thanks a lot. I appreciate the time and absolutely enjoy your show.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to another episode of Coaching Soccer Weekly. It's been really great to have interviews back to back. Kind of gets a break from just kind of hearing me talk for 45 minutes. So hopefully you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Just nice catching up with, and what a small world. And it was really great having this different perspective and having Jeff on the show. So thanks for him for reaching out. This weekend is Canada Day weekend. So there won't be any games for our players. We also are off Sunday, so hopefully we can take that time, go on vacation. I'm going up with my brother in Waterloo. So lots of things going on, but not soccer related, which is okay. Next week, I'm going to be starting an 8-week soccer camp. I'm going to be the head of soccer for a local day camp here, so I'll probably talk about that throughout the summer. But until next week, which I will be here still, enjoy the journey, enjoy the moments, but most importantly,